So after releasing a string of redundant sequels in the Terminator franchise, they've actually done something pretty interesting and risky, which is releasing a new anime series focused on an entirely new set of characters aside from John Connor. Risky, yes, but a risk that I think was well paid off.
The end of the world comes tomorrow.
Terminator Zero. In Japan, Malcolm Lee has been developing another AI system that is intended to compete with Skynet. As Judgment Day approaches in 1997, Lee finds himself and his three children pursued by an unknown robot assassin. So I normally don't review anime or TV on this channel, and I'm not gonna change that anytime in the future for a couple of reasons. I'm not really a big fan of anime, honestly. I do think the animation style is very beautiful visually, and it hits all over Western animation, in my opinion. But the stories being told, it just never really grabbed me. It wasn't really exactly my style. And with TV, there's a lot of good TV shows I watch, but I never finish. I just don't have the energy to sit down and dedicate myself to episode, season to season, even if I like them. There are very few exceptions to that rule, and Terminator Zero is the exception to both anime and TV for me personally. I want to check this out because I'm a big Terminator fan, and I really want a good sequel or new entry for a while now, and I think Terminator Zero totally does that. It actually might be one of my new favorites now. And I think some of the riskier elements I brought up are big strengths of the series. And it starts with the story, because the story, it takes place right before Judgment Day, even during it kind of, where you're focusing on a character named Malcolm Lee who's developing this new AI, an AI that in the future will actually wage war against Skynet with humans caught in the middle. And right there already, I think the story is already really creative and fresh, and it adds a new interesting dynamic that as a Terminator fan, I'm not really used to seeing. Yes, I've heard that the idea of an AI going up against Skynet was brought up in Terminator comics, but I've not read those comics, so this is like my exposure to it. But in the series, the way it's executed, I thought it was really well done. I think it totally just flips the table over in terms of like story and expectations in this franchise, where I feel like the franchise has gone very formulaic. It kind of makes you question like who the villains are and who are the heroes, and I think it really broadens up the mythos of Terminator, right? The mythos always being Judgment Day, humans fight machines, John Connor saves everyone in the end. Adding this new rival AI that's a threat to both humans and Skynet, I think just really switches things up. And I think the series, Terminator Zero, does play with that. It actually does play with those elements and expands on them. Additionally, I think another thing that was kind of risky was having this series focus on entirely new characters. John Connor is not in this at all. There was no mention of John Connor or Kyle Reese or Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator. Instead, yes, you're focused on Malcolm Lee, as I said before, who's developing the AI. You're also focusing on his children, the children's caretaker, who has a kind of mysterious past, and then the resistance soldier who's sent back in time to protect them. I have to say, all the characters I absolutely loved and I was invested in from the get-go. From Malcolm to his kids and everyone else. I think the series also does a really good job using time management to really focus on each characters. None of them really feel like they're left on the sidelines. They all have their own arcs, their own vulnerabilities, as well as interesting twists and turns in the series that bronze up the mythos, with each character playing a very important role in the immediate story, but also in the world of Terminator in the future. And like I said, I won't go into spoilers, but very cool twists, very interesting ones that really amplify the story, in my opinion. I might use the word fresh a lot in this review, but I think for good reason, because there's one thing to say about Terminator Zero, even if you don't like it, it's that it's very fresh, very creative. We're used to all these Terminator films just trying to copy Terminator 2, or maybe even Terminator 1, where it's just, a chase film, right? You have the Terminator sent back in time, the Protector sent from the Resistance to protect John Connor, and there's a bunch of car chase scenes, a lot of shooting, and that's it. It's the same story over and over again. In Terminator Zero, it might start off that way in the first couple episodes, but after that, the story goes into an entirely new direction that you just don't expect. that makes it way more intense, more dark, and just way more complicated in terms of characters and themes. And like I said, it really bronzes up the mythos and lore of Terminator than what we're used to seeing. It feels like a bigger world now. I like that. Another reason why I like Terminator Zero is because it actually took place in Japan, which that might sound like a weird thing to bring up. It's like, okay, so it takes place in Japan. It's an anime. Well, of course, why wouldn't it? But the thing that I think people overlook, and I certainly overlooked since I watched this, was that the reason why the Terminator films are always such like a high octane films, a lot of shooting and stuff like that, is because it takes place in America, where you can go to like your local gun shop and just pick up any gun you want with all the ammo you desire. Whereas in Terminator Zero, because it takes place in Japan, the series actually emphasizes and makes it a part of the story that, hey, this is Japan. There are no gun shops here. You can't just go in and buy guns. And that makes both the Terminator and the Resistance soldier really have to improvise in the story to do combat. You have the Terminator, he's making his own weapons by shooting out nails, and he attaches it to his exoskeleton. And then with the Resistance soldiers, he's really using her surrounding, and you can tell it's a much harder fight to slow down this Terminator, much harder than what Kyle Reese had to go through, or what Arnold had to go through in Terminator 2. And because of that, Terminator Zero, the fight scenes at least, it feels very, way more intense, more improvised, with a feeling of more desperation. But of course, we have to talk about the animation. And frankly, after watching this series, I could not imagine it being made in any other formats, whether it's a different type of animation or if it's always a live action film. I think the style of anime actually complemented the tone that they were going for, the action, the characters. It didn't feel forced in any way. And additionally, I think the use of anime also amplified the sense of horror in the series, which you can tell Terminator Zero was clearly going for. The horror of this unstoppable killing machine that will just stop at nothing to track you down, and how this machine is so incredibly strong and brutal and violent. You can tell they're very inspired by the first Terminator film, right? And maybe people might forget, but the first Terminator film, when we first see Arnold, he rips a hole through some guy's chest, and after that first Terminator film, the violence totally does get tamed down after that, and that's no disrespect for Terminator 2. I love Terminator 2, but the violence is tamed down. Terminator Zero looks back on Terminator 1 and doubles down on it. And the animation, it actually amplifies that. However, if I had to critique this series, I think it was the way it was trying to handle the timelines in the Terminator franchise, because the showrunner, was trying to say that all the films are canon to Terminator Zero, and the show makes a quick attempt at that, but I just felt it was a little too confusing. Not because it was overly complicated. It's actually quite the opposite. The explanation that they try to give to explain all the timelines, it's very vague and shorthanded, and so much so that you honestly could easily ignore it and the show will feel better for it. But it kind of bothered me. I wish they could have elaborated a little bit more about, like, hey, what do they mean by that? Like, how are all these timelines again connected exactly? Is this connected to John Connor? And because it's so vague and shorthanded, I didn't really get that answer. In all honesty, I think it's best to treat this series as a reboot that resets the entire Terminator continuity. And I think after that, everything makes sense and the show feels better for it. With confusing timeline issues aside, I really loved Terminator Zero. It just felt so fresh, unique, so creative. But the execution was also incredibly stylish and exhilarating, to the levels of Terminator 1 and 2, especially even Terminator 1, honestly, in terms of like style and direction. I think Terminator Zero is also just the best sequel new entry in the Terminator franchise by a country mile. I think it deserves a stand in the presence with Terminator 1 and 2, in my opinion. Even if you don't like anime, which I'm certainly not a fan of, I do think it's still worth a watch. And I think even if you don't quite like it as much as I do, you'll still come out saying, it was creative, it was trying to do something different, and I could probably see why people like it. Having said all that, I do think Terminator Zero is 4.5 stars out of 5. for watching, guys. I want to know, what's your favorite Terminator film? One or two? That seems to be a contention among online debaters. Also, do you plan on watching Terminator Zero? Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. I'll see you next time.